Hi, folks. Welcome to your next workshop. This one is going to be on setting up your gradebook. So this is going to be a very simple introduction to a relatively complex system, but we're going to do the best that we can. This is a practical one, so I'm just going to be walking you through the process in a general sense on my screen. Oh, by the way, I'm Doug Hemphill. I'm one of the campus instructional designers. And I have some of my colleagues here today, Carrie Mosick and Jen Laubscher, who will help handle any questions that you might have. So if a question does pop up, just go ahead and throw it into the chat session, and they will either give you an answer or they'll call it out to me. Additionally, after we get through the basic introduction, we'll be available to answer more detailed questions that you might have. So with that, I am going to start sharing my screen. And what we're going to be working off of today is actually an existing tutorial that you can find on our website. So everything I say today is available right through here. And I'm going to post a link to that in the chat. Or I'm going to try. I'm sorry. As soon as I go to screen share, I always have a little bit of trouble getting back into the chat. But there, it should be available to everybody now. So to start out with, we're just in any generic Blackboard course. Nothing special to see here. And based on the general way that we set up our Blackboard courses, everything that we do is going to be somewhere within our content area. This is where we usually would put all of our learning activities, including readings, but also, of course, including any sort of assessment. Now, the most important thing to understand about the Blackboard system is that anything that you do within this interface will automatically go into the full grade center. So that's kind of good news because it means that you can go ahead and build your course and set up all of your assignments and then deal with the grade center afterwards. So we're going to start by just creating some very basic assessments of the three types that we most commonly use. So for assessments, we have an assignment, which is simply a spot for students to upload some sort of document. And I'm not going to get into the specifics of creating this because that's not the purpose of this workshop. But what you're really looking at is the points possible. So as soon as I enter that, this is now into my grade book. So I'm going to hit submit. And it works the same way if I create a test. As soon as I create a test, whatever the point value of that exam was automatically goes into my grade book. So in this case, that one's worth 100 points. So that is now in my grade book as well. And last but not least, many of us do use discussions. So if I go into my discussions and find a discussion, oops, sorry, clicked one too far. In this case, I'm just going to add some points to one of my existing discussions. So I just go to my discussion, find the area to make it graded, and give it whatever point value I want. So now that I've created a few basic discussions, where I would need to go, or sorry, some basic assignments, where I need to go is my grade center. So in this gray area in the lower corner of your course called course management, you want to expand grade center and go to full grade center. Now, by default, you might see a few more categories than this. You will always see a weighted total category and a total category. Those are default parts of the template. But where you're gonna want to usually start is by going to Manage and Column Organization. And what this does is it shows you everything that is in the gradebook. And this is also a great place to double check your work because it tells you what each assignment is worth. So it's very easy for me to make sure, oh yeah, all my tests are worth this, or all my assignments are worth this. So here I know assignment 1, which I created earlier, is worth 5 points, but this version of assignment 1 is worth 20. I may have screwed that up, so I might need to go back and fix that. This is also where I can rearrange things. So I may decide that actually I want my discussions to be at the top. What would more commonly be the case is once you've built out the entire course, you'll make a decision as to whether or not do I want to have a layout where I'm putting everything that is an assignment together, and then everything that's a test together, and everything that is a discussion together, or do I want them done by modules? So all the work from module 1 will be together, all the work from module 2 will be together, etc. And the reason that becomes important is, one, it's relevant to you as you create your work for what's easiest for you to work in, but also this represents how your students see their grades. So this layout represents the same thing that your students will see when they look at their grades. Oh, one thing I did want to point out back on that screen before I get too far ahead is there are also screens that you can hide and unhide. So like I said, you may see a few extra things. In my screen, I have hidden the username, student ID, and availability. And so anything that you don't want to see, simply check it, go to show and hide, and either show or hide. And you'll see now that I've hidden those, they've become grayed out. Now, the items above this bar are generally not seen by the student, but I can hide something below this bar, but be aware that just because I can't see it here does not mean that my students don't. So if I were to go ahead and hide example from myself, my students can still see that. Okay, so as I said, everything that I create in Blackboard as a graded assignment comes directly in here, and it brings its name with it. So you'll see I called this assignment 1, and it came into the gradebook as assignment 1. So you do want to take a little bit of care in naming your assignments and things like that, so that you don't end up with something that you can't read and you have to hover over every tab to figure out what it actually is. What you may find easiest to do is to put some sort of key in front of whatever it is that the assignment is. So one thing that I do often is use a key like this. So module 1, assignment 1, and then whatever my relevant name is. And for an exam, same thing, it'd be module 1, exam 1. And you'll see that although I made those changes in the content area, when I go back to the full grade center, they've automatically pushed the changes out to here. Now you can see it's really easy for me to tell what each assignment is without having to hover over it. For students, that's not as much of an issue because of the difference in how things display to them, but it can make your life a lot easier. So that's the basic version. The next thing that you can do is help organize this a little bit. You'll notice that if I go into a gradebook column, I have a category. Now, Blackboard will set these categories automatically, but there are a limited number of categories that Blackboard has built in. And you can see they correspond to the Blackboard tools. Excuse me. So it's possible that you may want to have a category that's outside of this. So maybe you want a category for a final project, in which case, again, we can go to the Manage tab, and this time we're going to go to Column Organization. Oops, sorry. This time we're going to go to Categories, and we're going to create a new category. And that's as simple as just create category, give it a name, and submit. And then just click OK. And now, if I go back into a gradebook column, you'll see that I have the ability to change that to a final project, as that's now a new thing on the list. Now, categories can be used in a couple different ways. There's something called smart views in the gradebook. So if you want to create a view just so that you can see how these class is doing on assignments or tests or things like that, it can use this category as an identifier. It also appears to students so that they can see whether or not, or they can understand where each assignment fits. Or it can also be used for what's called weighted gradebooks, which we'll be talking about in a few minutes. So I did want to pause and ask if there's any questions so far. Okay, cool. So moving on, once again, anything created in Blackboard shows up in this view, but it's possible that you may have something outside of Blackboard that you want to have show up in Blackboard. So maybe you need your students to watch a particular movie on YouTube and you want them to live stream you while you're watching the movie or something like that. It's harder to figure out examples in the current moment than it used to be. It used to be used for things like, I want my students to go out to a theater performance and I need them to be able to provide proof for that. But there still are examples where this comes in handy, and I may need to create something outside of Blackboard. And that's what this create column option is for. And all this lets you do is essentially create an assignment without it being in Blackboard. And it's really simple. You just click create column, put in the column name, and go ahead and give it your points possible and assign it to whatever category seems appropriate. And again, this is really all that you need to do here. One thing I would strongly discourage you from is never give something a separate column name and a separate grade center name. It can create a lot of confusion later on. And then go ahead and submit that. And you'll see at the end of my gradebook, I now have that new assignment. So that's another thing. Every time you create something new, it will always appear at the end of the gradebook. And if you want it somewhere else, you'll need to use that Manage Column Organization option. Okay, so now we have something that almost vaguely resembles a course full of assignments. So the next thing that we want to look at is, how do I get these assignments to my students? How do I total these assignments so that my students have some idea of where they are? And there's basically two ways to do this. By far the simplest is simply the total column. All this does is take the points that you put in for each assignment, adds them all together, and divides it by what a student has done and gives you their grade based on that. So I'm going to override some grades. Just to show you how this would work. Okay, so my student has a few grades. Now, the problem is 30 points doesn't really mean much to a student simply by itself. So what I'm gonna do is go in and actually tweak this a little bit. So I'm gonna go into my total and go to Edit Column Information, and I'm gonna change how students see the grades. So I'm gonna change it from a letter grade, or sorry, from the raw score to a percentage, but I'm gonna set it so that I can still see it as a score. And now when I go back in, I can see what that point value is. And I can also see really easily that, something's not quite right here. And the reason is Blackboard does allow you to give a point value above what the base point value is, which is what I did for this assignment. The default value is 0, and I gave it a 10. So if I take that off, okay, now I can see, okay, so they've created 20 points so far, so they currently have an 80% in the course. Now the other thing to notice in the total columns is this thing called calculate as a running total. If it's calculating as a running total, what it does is it will only grade those students that, or those items that have an attempt on them. So if a student has not tried an assignment yet, it will simply ignore that assignment. But as soon as they attempt an assignment, that gets added into their grade. If you change this to no, the system will view every assignment as a 0 until the student raises their grade. So you can see if I turn that on, suddenly my student is doing very, very poorly. So I would recommend generally using the running total because students freak out when they start with a 0. But when you use that, what you have to do is sort of keep track of your students and where they are in the course, because if a student misses an assignment and they don't enter anything into that grade, it won't be calculated. So you as the faculty need to make sure that you go through and give 0s for any assignment that is not completed, so that a student continues to have a clear view of what their grade is. So as I said, that is points-based grading. I'm going to give my test, and I'm moving these over using this small button here. There are 2 of these. The top one works for the columns. The bottom one works for the categories. I'm actually just going to go ahead and bring over everything right now. And I'm just going to go through and throw in some random numbers. But you'll see as I'm entering numbers, my total weight is changing down here. And all you want to make sure of is at the end of the day that my total weight equals my equals 100. Now, one of the big advantages to using a weighted gradebook is the system makes it really easy to drop a lowest grade if you want to. There are ways to do it in a total gradebook too, but it's just a bit easier in here. So it's very easy for me to say, you know what, your lowest 2 discussion grades will be discarded. The only thing to be aware of in using that is that until they have more than 3 discussions, it won't count any discussion in calculating the total grade, because technically they'll all be the lowest grade. So from here, I really don't need to worry about any of the other settings. The meat and potatoes of the weighted gradebook system really are right here. So I'm just going to hit submit. And now I have a weighted gradebook. And since I weighted assignments very heavily, I also have a very poor grade. The option to do, and which I sometimes find very handy, is to map these grades directly to a letter grade, especially if I'm gonna go ahead and submit this, or when I'm getting ready to do my final grades and move them into Banner, it's easier for me to be able to look and see a letter grade rather than seeing a percentage score. And it's also useful for students in simply knowing their final. So what I'm going to do is under Manage, I can go to Grading Schemas. And I have two because I've copied this thing way too many times. So by default, if you're using one of our templates, you will have a schema called letter. And you'll see that all this does is simply say, if a student's percentage is between these amounts, this is the grade that they will get. And this works with a points-based system as well. It doesn't matter, it'll simply turn the points into a percentage and we'll turn that into the letter grade. And you can customize this as you wish. Oswego does not actually have an official grading schema. There's no such thing. So this just happens to be one that's very commonly used, but you are free to change it and modify it however you want. And this is also kind of how you would do curving if you wanted to. You would adjust these grades to say, okay, based on the class performance, I'm going to be nice and say that 60 is equal to a C minus and work my way up from there. And once I've got that set up, all I need to do is go back into that weighted column and edit my column information. Oops. And change it to letter. And so that is based on the name that I gave that schema. If you created your own grading schema, you could name it whatever you want. And for my purposes, I still want to see my percentage. And now I'm going to click Submit. And you can see I've got my grade right there. So now if I was in Banner, or I had this open and I had my Banner grades open right next to it, all I would have to do is just look back and forth and say, okay, they got an E, they got that, they got that, they got that. I'm good. There are ways to import and export grades into Banner, or sorry, export grades from Blackboard into Banner. But unless you're working with a class size of at least 50, it's much simpler to just do it manually. So your gradebook should now be set up, and you should be good to go. So I'll open the floor for questions.
The question is, can you display the running weighted percentage?
So as long as the weighted total is the running weighted percentage. You'll see I have that same option for calculate as a running total. So as long as that is set to yes, that will provide a running percentage for the student. Or I should say a running total for the student. Obviously how they see it is based on how you've got your display settings. One thing I will note is Blackboard is set up such that students will only ever see one thing out of an individual column. So it may be a case that you want to make 2 copies of the weighted total so that students can see both their letter grade and their percentage.
Can you override the weighted total amount, like for in the end, I guess? Because sometimes, like, I'll set in the beginning of the semester, I'll let them know what grades will get them, like a C and a C minus and a B plus and all those, right? Sometimes though, a student will be really close and I want to bump them up to the letter grade, or, you know, the next highest. Can you override it?
Unfortunately not. The weighted, what are called calculated columns cannot be overridden. So that would be a case where if it was on a class-wide basis, I would probably just create a standalone column called final grade and fill it in that way. If it was just an individual student, then I would just reach out to that student. But yeah, unfortunately, that is the downside, is in showing this, it is very limited in terms of its ability to be flexible. What I might do in a case like that is say, the grade that you see in Blackboard is representative of your final grade. However, certain factors may change this. However, these would only cause your grade to go up, not down.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Another question is, can you isolate student grades so that you can just view one student's grade at a time?
Yes.
Okay.
And give me a second, I might even remember how. I may actually have to get back to that one. I know there's a way to do it, but it's actually been a very long time since I did it. And the memory is not jumping out at me. Because I know you can pull it through a couple of different reports, but I'm assuming they want to look at an individual student and view all of their grade, their assignments sort of in a list and be able to modify and change them.
I
Is
just,
that what?
I just
ahead.
Googled it and it's something about grade details. Go to the image of the grade details screen with the following. I'm not sure.
Well, I think I see what they're saying. So if you go to any individual assignment, you can hover over the grade and use the pull down to go into grade details. And now from here, this is an individual student and an individual assignment. And I can scroll through each of that student's individual assignments. So I'm looking at one student, but only seeing the assignment work that they've done. Now there is a report view that will give you all of the grades for a student, but I think that Kate's actually right that this is the only view that will give you the ability to review the grades and change them, but you can only look at one assignment at a time.
It also says you can do hide all other rows in the.
Yeah, I find
It
that
seems a little-
less
Yeah.
useful, but
Seems like a lot of work.
well, it's just a weird look for me, but that may be because of how I'm used to looking at things. But there is the option to isolate an individual student like that.
What about viewing the grade? Oh, never mind.
Well, I think just check something. I just want to see what this puts out. No. I have a feeling this. Okay, so this was the one that I was thinking of. If you run a grade report on a student, it will give you a report of the student and every grade that they have in every assignment at this point in time. The problem is that this view, you can't modify things. It's informational only. So that's probably a partial answer to your question, that if you want to see a student overview, use the grade report option. But if you want to sort of isolate a student for changing grades, use the grade details option. Other questions?
Nothing more is in the chat at this time.
Kind of spreads. Okay, so what I would say with using gradebooks is that set up your gradebook, and then if you have any questions or any concerns about it, drop a line to the instructional designers at help@oswego.edu. Because generally speaking, it's much easier to fix grade books beforehand rather than once they actually have student work in them. But obviously if it's after the fact and you have a problem, don't hesitate to call us. We'll still try to fix it. It will just probably take a little while. Trying to think. Yep, somebody's saying something.
How can we move gradebook design to another course section?
Okay, so if I go to okay, let me back up a step. If you're using a gradebook that is based on the material that is in the course, there's not really a way to move the gradebook design from one course to another without doing a full course copy, because the course will, you'll end up with an orphaned gradebook. It won't be connected to anything. So if you're doing a full course copy, the gradebook will simply come along with everything else. If you have a gradebook where it's built out of a bunch of individually created columns, though, you can do a partial course copy, which is the same as a regular course copy, except the only thing that I check is grade center columns and settings. I don't check anything else, and I go through the usual, where do I want this to go, and hit submit, and that will copy over your gradebook layout. Now, another thing to know is every time the course is copied, you will always end up with a new weighted total and total column if you don't already have one, because they're part of the basic default template of a course. So if you rename your total column or you delete one of these two, you'll always have a new one pop up when you copy the course. So every now and then you'll just have to go in as part of your cleanup for when you copy a course and just delete that extra column right out of there. Easy peasy. Other questions? Final thoughts from my fellow IEDs? Anything that I might be missing? Hints, tricks? Preferably magic tricks, but you know, I'll take anything at this time.
Nothing really comes to mind. He's right about having, you know, if you have any questions about your grade book, to have us review it. It's definitely easier to catch it in the very beginning than after it's started. We do fix them mid-semester, but it's definitely easier if we look at it first.
I don't have anything either, Doug.
Well, alrighty. Then I think the only other thing is to note that in just a little bit, with a bit of good luck, we'll be launching astronauts from US soil for the first time in 9 years. And I think that's pretty cool. So with that, I guess we'll close out. Oh. Okay, yep. So with that, I think we'll close out the meeting. Thank you all. And as always, we're happy to chat with you about anything, and our doors are always open.
Thank you.
Virtually.